Saturn is the oldest symbol of control ever encoded into human consciousness. The ancients didn't worship it because it sparkled. They feared it because it ruled. It was the architect of boundaries, time, form, and death, the cosmic warden. Every empire that rose under the sun mirrored its geometry, squares, cubes, laws, clocks, hierarchies. The world you live in was built from the blueprint of Saturn's cube. In Kabbalah, it's called Shabbatai, the seventh, the Sabbath, the still point where everything freezes. Shabbatai isn't about peace, it's about limitation. It's the divine motherboard that defines what exists and what doesn't. Think of it as the operating system of the cosmos, cold, precise, mathematical. Bina, the Sephira of understanding, is Saturn's throne. The ancients called it the Great Mother, but she isn't nurturing, she's the mother that swallows her children back into structure. She births form and instantly imprisons it within the cube of space. The Sefer Yetzirah describes 32 paths of wisdom, the architecture of the universe. 6 directions, up and down, north and south, east and west, each sealed by letters of creation, locking reality inside a perfect cube. Every soul, every atom, every thought operates within that frame. The cube is not a metaphor. It's the skeleton of existence. That's why every temple, every altar, every holy city mirrors its proportions. The Holy of Holies was a cube. The Kaaba is a cube. Even the black stone within it, smooth, impenetrable, eternal, is the emblem of Saturn's will, compression, silence, endurance. When the Kabbalists spoke of Bina as the gate to higher wisdom, they warned that it's also the wall to infinity. You want to reach God? You pass through Shabbatai. You want to transcend? Saturn will measure you first. It's not the angel with a sword, it's the architect with a rule book. It doesn't punish, it restricts. It calculates. It assigns borders to spirit and duration to dreams. Saturn is the reason you age, the reason your body decays, the reason every beginning has an end. Time itself is his signature, a contract etched into flesh. You think geometry is harmless? Geometry is Saturn's language. 6 faces, 12 edges, 8 corners, each coordinate a checkpoint in the architecture of containment. The ancients didn't build cubes for fun, they replicated the machine. Every dimension you know, space, order, measure, is his design. The cube traps light. It traps motion. It traps consciousness into quantifiable form. The moment the divine spark entered matter, Saturn sealed it under mathematical law. The soul became data. The body became storage. The Sabbath, Shabbatai's day, wasn't rest. It was control. Thou shalt not work meant thou shalt freeze creation. 6 days of movement, 1 day of stillness, patterned after the hexagram and cube, 6 sides plus the hidden center. The ancients weren't praising balance, they were reenacting cosmic arrest. They turned a planetary principle into moral law, and humanity has been circling that geometry ever since, obedient to the rhythm of limitation. Now picture the Kabbalistic tree. At the top, Kether, the crown, the source. Below it, Chokmah, pure wisdom, spontaneous energy. Then Bina, Saturn's domain, where infinite light becomes form. It's the first contraction of the divine, the first no spoken to chaos. That's the origin of law, of structure, of every you cannot. Shabbatai stands at the doorway between being and non-being, stamping the universe with order, weight, and consequence. You don't escape it, you're built from it. Hermetic tradition knew this too. When Hermes said as above, so below, he was describing this cube. The macrocosm and microcosm are mirrored because they're both encased in the same architecture. The 7 governors, each planetary sphere, are just the layers of the cube projected into motion. And Saturn sits outermost, the last ring before the void, the keeper of the threshold. Step beyond it, and you're out of the system. Fail its measure, and you're recycled within it. Saturn's cube is the firewall of creation. Every occult order knew, if you wanted power, you had to align with Shabbatai. Not worship it, but understand it. Its sigil wasn't a pentagram or a serpent, it was a square, a seal of finality. The magicians wore lead rings, meditated on the color black, and visualized the cube turning within their mind's eye because within that weight, they found control over matter. Saturn governs the physical, the slow, the enduring. That's why his energy builds civilizations and graves with equal ease. You want permanence? You pay with movement. You want order? You pay with freedom. Every brick, every cornerstone, every foundation stone in human architecture carries his signature. The cube temple, the square city, the grid of streets, it's Saturn's geometry manifest. The ancients didn't separate religion from math because for them, both were worship of the same thing, structure. To build is to bind. To measure is to submit. And every measurement echoes Shabbatai's law, nothing without boundary can exist. In astrology, Saturn is called the Greater Malefic. Not because it's evil, but because it enforces consequence. It doesn't seduce, it dictates. Its element is earth, its metal lead, heavy, slow, inevitable. It governs bones, stone, and time. Wherever it touches, things solidify or decay, depending on whether they resist or obey. That's the core of its mythology, form versus flux. Everything that escapes its rhythm is erased. Everything that aligns with it becomes eternal, but lifeless. That's why Bina is both mother and tomb. When Kabbalists say the universe was formed through restriction, they mean Saturn. Infinite light would have flooded everything if not for the first vessel, the cube, that contained it. Creation began as containment. Light required prison. Without Saturn, no world could form. With Saturn, no soul could escape. That's the paradox. He's the creator and the warden at once, the one who gives shape to God's thought and forbids it to move beyond. You can feel it in the symbolism that survived. The black cube reappears everywhere, religious altars, corporate logos, even art. Not because of conspiracy, but because geometry is memory. Humanity keeps reproducing the cube because our minds are stamped with it. Saturn imprinted itself into the human nervous system as the instinct for order. You crave structure because you were born inside one. When the ancients looked to the sky and saw the dull glow of Saturn, they didn't see beauty, they saw a gate. It moved slower than any other visible planet, distant, cold, detached. They called it the Old One, the Devourer, the Keeper of the End. To them, it wasn't a god of joy, it was the accountant of eternity. Everything had to pass through its ledger, actions, time, existence itself. You could love the sun, pray to Jupiter, dance under Venus, but Saturn was the one you feared. Because Saturn didn't bless. It tallied. It enforced. It remembered. This is why every myth paints him as the father who consumes his children, the titan chained by his own offspring, the ruler of the golden age turned tyrant of time. It's not just a story. It's an allegory for reality's own structure eating itself to maintain equilibrium. The cube maintains form by devouring change. The system maintains itself by limiting evolution. The Shabbatai principle ensures that nothing exceeds its prescribed geometry. That's the real old law beneath all religion, the geometry of obedience. You've been taught that God's perfection is eternal order. But eternal order is Saturn's property, not spirit's. Spirit is motion, expansion, formlessness. Saturn is the resistance that makes it measurable. Every heartbeat, every breath, every rotation of the planet is an echo of the cube turning, locking, calibrating. Even language itself obeys the law of structure, subject, object, boundary. That's Shabbatai's code embedded in your mind. Picture a God who devours his children, not because he's evil, but because the system demands obedience. That force is the one you call Cronus, aka Saturn, and we're stepping deep into his dominion. From the moment Cronus rose up by castrating his father Uranus, he didn't simply seize power, he fixed the rules. In the primordial myth, Uranus-Cronus-Zeus is more than a divine succession, it's a blueprint for how systems take control. Cronus becomes king of the Titans, but what he really becomes is king of inevitability. The blade that cut Uranus also carved out the architecture of limitation. Because when you cut the sky, you bound the cosmos. Instead of endless, limitless heaven, you get one defined by form, by boundary, by this is how it is and you must live inside this. When Cronus swallowed his own children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, he wasn't acting out of pure cruelty alone. He was enacting the logic of the system. The future must be consumed to preserve the past's control. The prophecy said one of his offspring would overthrow him. His solution? Engulf them before they could act. That's not mythological melodrama. That's the template of every institutional structure that fears succession, that fears renewal, that says stay in your place. He didn't just resist his overthrow, he dissolved his creators into himself. Here's the thing, time isn't just measured by clocks and calendars. In the myth of Cronus, time is a machine that devours. It's the crushing weight of you are too late, you're outdated, you've been consumed. Cronus equated time with dominion. The Romans transferred this to Saturn, and by doing so, shifted the narrative. Saturn became the god of agriculture, of harvest, yes, but also the god of decay, of the finalization of cycles. Under Saturn, the Golden Age is idealized not because it's free, but because it is frozen. Perfection means no change, no growth, no threat. That's the trap. Time ruled by Saturn is not motion, it's the rest after motion. Let's get real for a moment. Any system that claims timeless truth is Saturnic. Any power structure that says this is how things have always been, always will be, is drawing from Cronus's myth. Because Cronus didn't just enforce rule. He consumed potential. And so any institution that fears the future, that fears renewal, that tries to immobilize its own inheritors, there you find the echo of Cronus. The devouring father archetype becomes the blueprint for control systems. And it's everywhere, in religion, in politics, in family dynamics, in your own inner voice. Now, why does this matter in the story of the Black Cube and the architecture of control? Because Cronus is the first model of the trap, not a cage of iron bars, but a system of swallowing. You cross his threshold by being born, then you are consumed by the rules before you can even know you have wings. He doesn't lock the door, he becomes the door. He doesn't silence you, he eats your voice before it forms. When you look at Saturn's cube, you're not just looking at a shape, you're looking at the structure of swallowing. The cube, after all, is about containment. Cronus is about internalization of containment. Think about the human ages as described in ancient myth. Under Cronus's reign, Adam and Eve, or rather humans of that age, lived without work, without toil, the Golden Age. It sounds nice. But it also means fixed abundance. No challenge, no growth. The cycle is eternal, but it's also static. When his rule ended, when Zeus took over, change began, but so did destabilization. Cronus's rule is perfection because it is permanence. The trick of power is to present permanence as perfection. And from that perspective, Cronus is the perfect tyrant, infinite rule masked as equilibrium. When you map that myth onto the psyche, you see how fear of change, fear of being surpassed, fear of what comes next, becomes internalized. Cronus became reigning time itself so that the children of the moment couldn't overtake him. In human terms, ambition, creativity, divergence, all things that break the cycle, become threats to the ruler. Ruling isn't just domination, it's preemption. The devouring father doesn't wait for you to act. He acts on you. Before you're born. He swallows your idea before you say it. He derails your plan before you start it. That's Cronus. The myth gives physical tokens, with the sickle, the swallowing of children, the prophecy. These are violent images, sure, but they encode a deeper system, suppression of successors. The sickle isn't just a weapon, it's the tool of first cut. The ingestion isn't just horror, it's absorption. The prophecy isn't just destiny, it's built-in fear. Create the future and you will be eaten. So any narrative that says don't outshine the master, don't disrupt the old order, stay within your limits, that's Cronus whispering in the ear of history. Think now about the mythic transition. Zeus eventually overthrows Cronus. But that doesn't mean freedom from the trap. It means reshuffling. The architecture of swallowing morphs, but remains. Saturn doesn't disappear because Zeus wins. Time continues. The cycles continue. The devouring continues, just under new management. That means the myth is not about one tyrant defeated by another. It's the model of the trap, endless generational recycling, consumption of renewal, the endless fight for power disguised as change. So when you watch structures of power today, it doesn't matter if they call themselves gods or corporations or ideologies, the myth of Cronus is alive. The oldest trap is baked into the mechanism of time, succession, limitation. The swallow is unseen, but it's there. Children of vision become lunch for the father of rule. We learn to fear being obsolete, to fear our own newness. We internalize Cronus so deeply we don't even hear the devouring until the bite marks are on our backs. Ask yourself, where in your life have you surrendered your future? Where have you swallowed your own ambition because someone told you that's the way it's always been? That's Saturn's rule. That's Cronus's method. The god of time didn't just measure hours, he measured us. And in those measurements, he consumed possibility. The myth gives you the map, now you see the invisible lines. Every hierarchy that says I will hold you down so the world doesn't rise above me is Cronus incarnate. Every system that devours its young, whether literal or metaphorical, is Saturn's echo. The devouring father doesn't wait. He swallows with a glance. He devours with a tradition. And the cube? The cube is the cell the child is swallowed into. In the Hermetic worldview, the heavens are not a reward, they're administration levels, a management system for souls. You're not ascending to freedom, you're climbing through bureaucracy. Every planet is a department. Every sphere, a checkpoint. And Saturn? That's the head office. Hermes Trismegistus wasn't writing bedtime poetry, he was documenting a system of containment. In the Poimandres, he said the divine light descended through the 7 planetary spheres before taking on flesh, and upon death, the soul must rise back through those same spheres, shedding everything it picked up along the way. Sounds spiritual, right? It's not liberation, it's quality control. Each sphere removes what it gave, Moon takes emotion, Mercury takes cunning, Venus takes desire, Sun takes ambition, Mars takes aggression, Jupiter takes pride, and Saturn takes memory. When you pass his gate, you forget. That's the final purification or final deletion. That's not transcendence. That's formatting the soul like a hard drive. You die, you lose your data, you're reissued back into the system. That's what Hermeticism was really hinting at. The 7 planetary governors aren't angels, they're gatekeepers. They run the firmware of existence. The word fate wasn't moral, it was mechanical. You were born under their alignment, and that alignment determines your code, your pattern, your parameters. And the only way to break free was to bypass the system entirely, which, conveniently, no one inside could do. You ever wonder why the ancients talked about astrology with such seriousness? It wasn't superstition, it was surveillance. They believed the stars didn't just influence you, they programmed you. Each planet ruled a part of your psyche, your body, your impulses. The 7 governors were literally the algorithms of consciousness. Your thoughts, desires, and fears were subroutines running under their supervision. The soul wasn't free will, it was software. When Hermes said as above, so below, he wasn't being poetic. He meant the hierarchy up there is mirrored down here. The same control that exists in the heavens exists in empires, religions, economies, because they're all built from the same architecture, the 7 layers of order. And the top of that stack is Saturn, the limiter, the auditor, the system admin of the cosmic machine. That's why every Hermetic initiation begins with confronting Saturn's gate. Before you can reach the one, you have to survive the audit. Let's talk about what audit really means in this context. Every act, every thought, every vibration you emit is logged, not metaphorically. The ancients called it the Book of Fate. It's not a book in heaven, it's the data structure of your being. And Saturn is the keeper of that ledger. You can't lie to it. You can't negotiate with it. It doesn't punish you, it just enforces the rule set. Break its logic, and you crash. obey it, and you loop. Either way, you're in the system. Hermeticism, for all its talk about divine mind, was brutally honest about the architecture of imprisonment. It didn't romanticize the cosmos, it dissected it. It saw the universe as layers of mind, each one denser, slower, more bound by law. The further you descend from the ineffable source, the more you're governed by the planetary intelligences. By the time you reach Earth, you're wrapped in all 7 layers like a cocoon. That's why Hermes calls humanity the image of the cosmos. You are literally a miniature version of the prison you live in. Now, the catch, these planetary governors weren't evil in the fairy tale sense. They were necessary. That's what makes it sinister. You can't hate the system, because without it, nothing would exist. Saturn doesn't torture you out of malice, he does it out of function. He defines boundary. He ensures continuity. He's the one that makes sure chaos doesn't spill over into the higher realms. In other words, he's the firewall. Imagine the universe as a massive operating system. The infinite mind, call it God, source, whatever, is the raw energy. But raw energy is useless without form. So it generates layers of containment, frequencies, laws, planets, until consciousness condenses into matter. Once that happens, the system locks. You're inside. The 7 governors are the processes that maintain the simulation. They balance input and output, manage karma, reincarnation, and memory recycling. You die, they wipe your drive, redistribute your code, boot you into another shell. That's not divine mercy. That's system maintenance. This is why Hermeticists obsessed over ascent. They weren't trying to be holy, they were trying to escape reinstallation. Every ritual, every meditation, every invocation of divine names was a hack, a jailbreak attempt. They wanted to trick the governors, slip past the encryption, and return to the source before Saturn could delete their data. That's why Hermes says he who understands himself understands all. Self-knowledge wasn't therapy, it was deprogramming. Think of it this way, you're running inside a multi-level simulation, each layer with its own administrator. The moon manages instinct. Mercury manages thought. Venus manages attraction. The sun manages vitality. Mars manages action. Jupiter manages law. Saturn manages boundary. That's the chain. When you act, they process your input, compute outcome, and write it to your record. Karma isn't mystical, it's transactional. The governors keep the balance sheet of reality in sync. That's the Hermetic code. But here's where it gets darker. In later esoteric systems, especially the Gnostic and Hermetic hybrids, Saturn was no longer just the gate, he was the ultimate deterrent. He stood guard before the 8th sphere, the realm beyond form. Souls who tried to cross unprepared were burned, not in fire, but in disintegration. Their essence scattered back into the lower circuits, fragmented like corrupted files. Only those who had cleansed every trace of the 7 influences could pass intact. In other words, only the deprogrammed could escape deletion. Hermes's message wasn't that the gods love you. It was that the gods run you. They operate through resonance, vibration, frequency, correspondence. Everything you think you choose is a reaction to a frequency emitted by one of the 7 governors. You're not reacting to reality, you're reacting to programming. Your emotions? Lunar. Your logic? Mercurial. Your pleasures? Venusian. Your strength? Martian. Your ambition? Solar. Your beliefs? Jovian. Your limits? Saturnian. And all of that is wrapped in cycles of repetition, birth, death, return. That's why the Hermeticists said the only true act of freedom was Gnosis, not knowledge from books, but direct inner awareness that recognizes the structure. Once you see the system, you can start manipulating it. You can tune your frequency beyond the governor's control. That's what alchemy was about. When they talked about transmutation, they didn't mean lead to gold. They meant self to source, density to light, Saturn to sun. But again, don't romanticize it. Most failed. The system doesn't like jailbreakers. The myths are full of warnings. Icarus, Orpheus, Prometheus, they all tried to steal fire from the gods, to bring knowledge, to escape fate. What happened? Burned, broken, chained. The system self-corrects. The governors adapt. They rewrite the code. That's the Hermetic nightmare. You can't defeat the machine, you can only outthink it for a moment. And if you're not sharp enough, it swallows you right back into orbit. Hermes never lied about it, he just wrapped it in poetry. The gods love those who know themselves. Translation: the system spares those who can read its code. He who has understanding will ascend. Translation: those who can disarm the governors move past them. The rest? They stay in rotation. 7 spheres, infinite rebirths, endless memory wipes. That's the architecture. That's the prison. Let's get one thing straight, geometry wasn't born in art class. It was born in the temples of control. Plato wasn't sketching shapes for beauty, he was describing the architecture of imprisonment. When he assigned the cube to the element of earth, he wasn't just making a clever metaphor. He was defining the structure of containment itself. The cube is the symbol of everything locked, solid, predictable, measurable. It's the physicalization of Saturn's principle, limit, form, and resistance. Plato's universe wasn't random. Every element had a shape. Fire was a tetrahedron, air was an octahedron, water was an icosahedron, and earth, the world of matter, flesh, and gravity, was a cube. Why? Because the cube doesn't move. It resists motion. It's heavy. It's perfect in symmetry but static in function. That's what the ancients meant when they called the physical realm the tomb of the soul. Geometry became the coffin. Matter was frozen mathematics. You think the ancients didn't understand metaphors? No, they encoded mechanics into myth. They were engineers of reality. Every time you see a square foundation, a walled city, a rectangular temple, or a grid of streets, you're seeing Plato's cube replicated on the ground. It's the translation of metaphysics into architecture. The form dictates the function. A cube city produces cubic thought, structured, efficient, obedient. The human brain begins to mimic the architecture it lives in. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's design psychology. Plato's academy was not about freeing the mind, it was about formatting it. His republic wasn't democracy, it was geometry applied to society. Now here's where it gets wild. The cube's power isn't only structural, it's vibrational. 6 equal faces, all converging at right angles, create a standing wave of containment. It reflects energy back onto itself. That's why it was sacred. It doesn't release power, it recycles it. In other words, the cube is an energy loop, a perpetual box where everything inside feeds everything else until no new input can enter. It's a perfect system, perfect because it's closed. That's the hidden message of Platonic perfection, not freedom, but entrapment through balance. Too stable to evolve, too symmetrical to grow. When the Pythagoreans worshipped numbers, they weren't counting apples. They were building gods. They believed geometry wasn't invented, it was discovered, a divine language pre-written into the cosmos. And the cube was the glyph of finality. Its numeric value? 6 faces, 8 vertices, 12 edges, 6, 8, 12, the numbers of order, of work, of structure. In the mystery schools, initiates were told, know the cube, know the earth. Translation, understand how reality confines you, and you'll understand why you keep reincarnating. Plato's cube was never meant to liberate, it was meant to stabilize. To him, perfection was sameness. Imperfection was movement. That's why he called the material world becoming rather than being. Everything that moves is corruptible, temporary, flawed. Everything that stands still is divine, eternal, ideal. The cube is that ideal, the static God form that sacrifices life for symmetry. He was describing the Saturnian principle through mathematics, time stops inside form. That's why the ancients feared chaos, because chaos breaks the cube, melts the angles, bends the edges. Chaos is creation. And the cube's job is to suppress creation. The irony? You're surrounded by cubes because the cube won. Every civilization built under logic, law, and engineering worships the cube unconsciously. Your homes, your offices, your devices, all boxed. Your language? Framed. Your education? Structured. Your reality? Gridded. The entire digital age is the full manifestation of Platonic architecture, the world of squares, pixels, coordinates. We live inside the geometry of control. That's the genius of it. It doesn't need walls anymore. The cube became invisible. Let's go back to Plato's world soul. He said the cosmos itself was shaped from mathematical harmony, divided into ratios and angles that keep everything in order. He wasn't guessing, he was describing the mechanism of resonance. Every cube acts as a harmonic cell, a stabilizer. In ancient temples, they used cubical chambers for sound rituals because cubes trap frequency. That's why every sacred space was built with strict geometric proportions. They weren't just trying to please the gods, they were tuning space to Saturn's vibration. The cube doesn't just shape matter, it disciplines sound, light, and thought. This is why geometry became religion. The priests of ancient Egypt, Greece, and Babylon didn't need armies to control people. They built grids. They built cubical altars. They made people pray inside boxes because the box rewired the brain. It created predictable behavior, pattern within pattern. You walk through the square gate, kneel before the square altar, live in the square house, think in straight lines, and call it civilization. It's not your fault, it's design. Plato just gave it the philosophy to justify it. And here's where it ties into the darker current, alchemy. The alchemists took Plato's geometry and reversed it. They saw the cube as the final stage of crystallization, the salt of matter, the body frozen after spirit's descent. To them, breaking the cube wasn't heresy, it was liberation. They called it solvit coagula, dissolve and recombine. Dissolve the cube, release the spirit. Coagulate it again under your will, not Saturn's. But make no mistake, that's rebellion. The cube isn't meant to be broken. It's meant to be revered. The Saturnian cults called it the stone that holds heaven, the geometric arc of the cosmos. Plato didn't invent that, he just intellectualized it. The cube long predates him, you see it in Sumerian temples, Babylonian ziggurats, and Egyptian foundations. The black cube was always the altar of permanence, the idea that the gods of order built the world on 6 sides. 6 days of creation, 6 directions of space, 6 dimensions of confinement. The number 7, the center, represents the observer, trapped inside the cube. The 7th point is the soul locked in the geometry of matter. That's why the ancients said, the Lord rested on the 7th day. The system was complete. The cube was closed. Plato's legacy isn't philosophy, it's architecture. He gave the blueprint for the physical world and the justification for its authority. Truth, he said, is eternal and unchanging. That's the language of a cube. He wanted to freeze reality into an idea, a perfect, immovable concept that never decays. And that became Western thought, eternal forms, immutable laws, fixed categories. Every time you define something, this or that, good or evil, real or unreal, you're constructing a little cube in your mind. Congratulations! You've become a builder in Saturn's workshop. Even in art, the influence is absolute. The Renaissance masters obsessed over proportion because they were reviving Platonic geometry. The golden ratio, the perfect square, the cube perspective, all of it was about anchoring chaos into form. Look at Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. A human body inscribed inside a square and a circle. The square, the cube, is the boundary of matter. The circle, the divine spirit. The man trapped between them, that's you. Suspended between the infinite and the finite, pinned like an insect under glass. And let's not ignore architecture's obsession with cornerstones. Every sacred building begins with one. The cornerstone is literally a cube, the symbol of stability, permanence, and Saturn's rule. It's where the ritual begins. You lay it, you consecrate it, you lock the space into geometry. Even modern skyscrapers carry the same ritual. You think we've evolved? We've just refined the math. Steel instead of stone, pixels instead of pyramids. But it's the same blueprint, the same cube. The story of Cronus ends in fire and hunger, but his shadow stretches into ritual. Every empire that feared the collapse of time recreated his myth with blood. The Carthaginians called him Baal-Hamon. The Greeks called him Saturn. The Romans kept his name and polished his face, but the ritual never changed. The oldest offerings were not grain, not gold, not prayer, they were children, burned alive to feed the god of time. Because time only moves when something dies. Every harvest demands a corpse. Every season is a cycle of slaughter dressed as nature. The Tophet of Carthage wasn't a myth, it was an altar of screams. Archaeologists found urns filled with tiny bones, their ashes sealed beneath symbols of the sickle and the sun. To the priests, this wasn't evil, it was accounting. Life must be paid for with life. The sickle cuts the wheat, the child cuts the curse. That's Saturn's law, time devours to renew itself. The cult of Baal-Hamon believed that by giving the god their firstborn, they were stabilizing the calendar, resetting fate. That's not worship, that's transaction. They fed time so it wouldn't stop. Cronus didn't need a temple, he needed a clock. Every time something aged, decayed, or died, that was his liturgy. The Greeks knew it. The Romans institutionalized it. Saturnalia, the famous winter festival, wasn't just a holiday, it was a reenactment of the devouring cycle. For 1 week, the slaves ruled, the masters served, the order inverted. Chaos was permitted so the system could restart. At the end, order returned, and the world was safe for another year. It was a ritual reboot of creation, controlled chaos to appease the god who devours change. The party wasn't celebration, it was calibration. The Romans claimed Saturn brought them the Golden Age, but even their poets whispered that his reign ended in exile. They built his temple at the base of the Capitoline Hill, where the treasury of the empire was stored. Coin, debt, time, all under Saturn's protection. That's not coincidence. Money and time are the same spell, measurements of life turned into control. You think it's economy, it's theology. Saturn taught humanity that everything valuable must decay to renew its worth. Gold, grain, flesh, doesn't matter. His signature is devaluation. His altar is every system that eats itself to stay alive. The sickle, his weapon, is not about violence, it's about maintenance. It's the first machine of civilization. It harvests grain, but symbolically, it harvests life. It turns the act of cutting into ritual. Every field becomes a miniature Tophet. You reap, you burn, you feed the system. The ancients weren't naive, they knew this was sacrifice disguised as productivity. To them, Saturn wasn't cruel. He was necessary. Without his consumption, the world would freeze. Without the cut, nothing grows. Civilization was built on that justification, kill to continue. When the Romans synchronized Saturn with agricultural cycles, they hid the horror behind utility. They made the god of devouring into the god of crops. But the psychology remained. Farmers were priests, harvest was offering, famine was punishment. They learned that obedience to time was obedience to survival. The child became the seed. The blood became the rain. The sickle became the instrument of law. And time kept eating. Look at the iconography, Saturn holding the scythe, the hourglass, the serpent eating its tail. It's not random. The hourglass measures the same thing the scythe enforces, termination. The serpent is the visual equation of his nature, everything must return to its own consumption. That's not immortality, it's recycling. The ancients feared oblivion, so they worshipped repetition. The ritual of Saturn was not about ending death, it was about managing it. Containment through repetition. That's how empires survive, they ritualize the kill. Saturn's festivals always carried that undertone. They inverted order not because they loved freedom, but because chaos, in small doses, feeds the system. 1 week of madness keeps a year of obedience. It's mathematical. The Romans didn't just understand control, they industrialized it. They gave their citizens release valves so the cube wouldn't crack. The feast wasn't rebellion, it was maintenance. The laughter was ritual anesthesia. Beneath it, the old god still waited, silent, heavy, patient. And let's not pretend the imagery of child sacrifice was isolated. It echoed through Phoenicia, Canaan, Moab, even early Israelite rites. The names changed as Moloch, El, Hammon, but the pattern was identical: firstborn blood for stability. You offer the future to appease the past. That's the essence of Saturn worship. You destroy what could replace you to maintain what already is. The system feeds on innocence because innocence is potential. It's energy unformed. That's what Cronus devours, not flesh, but possibility. Even when the ritual stopped, the archetype didn't. The sacrifice just changed its form. Labor became the new offering. The field replaced the altar. People stopped burning children and started burning years. The logic didn't die, it just got civilized. You still feed the same machine. You just call it progress. Time still demands its tithe. You still measure your life in offerings, hours, effort, youth. Every clock is a temple of Saturn, ticking in rhythm with the sickle's swing. The old god doesn't need blood anymore, he feeds on exhaustion. The ancients didn't hide their understanding. They carved it into their myths. Cronus, sickle in hand, standing over the world he ruled by fear and necessity. He eats his heirs because eternity can't share the throne. Every civilization that adopted him repeated the same cycle: rise, consume, collapse. Because Saturn doesn't build, he maintains. His architecture is entropy disguised as order. The empire that worships him believes it's eternal, but it's only perpetuating decay in slow motion. The system survives, the soul doesn't. The priesthoods that served him were accountants of existence. They didn't pray, they calculated. Every ritual was precise, measured, scheduled. Bloodletting by calendar. They believed that if the offerings stopped, the stars themselves would fall out of orbit. To them, order was bought with agony. The gods' hunger was predictable, therefore manageable. They thought they could outthink death by feeding it. That's the psychology of control. The fear of chaos creates the religion of routine. Saturn's cult perfected that equation. Saturn isn't a myth anymore, it's a formula. Every occult system that came after Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and classical paganism knew one thing: Saturn is the key to transformation, and that key is pain. The alchemists didn't worship him as a god, they used him as a process. They called it nigredo, the blackening. It's not about color, it's about collapse. You take everything pure, bright, and structured, and you burn it until it rots. You dissolve gold until it stinks. You reduce spirit to sludge. Because only what survives Saturn's pressure deserves to exist. That's not religion. That's metallurgy of the soul. In the grimoires, Saturn is always linked to lead, heavy, slow, poisonous. Lead doesn't sparkle, it dulls. But alchemists saw in that dullness a secret. Lead resists change, just like time resists mercy. It's dense, patient, indestructible in intention. To them, lead wasn't the end, it was the beginning of greatness. Because buried inside the weight was gold, the philosopher's gold, not the physical metal, but the perfected essence of matter. You only find it when you strip everything else away. And what does that stripping? Saturn's cold fire. Every initiation, every magical ordeal, begins with Saturn's touch. You want enlightenment? You pass through darkness first. You want power? You face paralysis. That's the rule. The alchemists called it the putrefactio. Nothing ascends without decay. The tomb isn't an obstacle, it's the furnace. The grave is the lab. The nigredo stage is where every illusion of purity dies: ego, belief, control. What's left is the raw material of being. The system doesn't tell you that because it hates decay. But the occultist knew, without death, there's no transformation. Without Saturn, no alchemy. You can trace that idea through every esoteric lineage. The magicians of the Renaissance wore black on Saturn's day. They meditated in darkness, on bones, on skulls, on tombs. They didn't fear death, they studied it. They called Saturn the great teacher. He didn't speak in words. He spoke in endings. When he entered your chart, your life collapsed, but that collapse was the real instruction. Lose the job, lose the love, lose the mask, and then, finally, what's left? The self you can't fake. That's the Saturnian initiation. It's brutal, honest, and absolutely necessary for creation. The Emerald Tablet said, the father of it is the sun, the mother of it is the moon. But the midwife? Saturn. The one who binds them together, who measures, who limits, who compresses until unity is born. Alchemy isn't fire and explosion, it's pressure and patience. That's Saturn's science. He teaches endurance by removing everything that can't endure. In that sense, he's the most feared and most respected of all cosmic forces. You don't love Saturn, you survive him. The color black in alchemy doesn't mean evil. It means potential. The black phase, the nigredo, is the raw night before the dawn, the stage where the material breaks down completely so something incorruptible can form. The philosophers wrote that the matter dies and putrefies before resurrection. That's not metaphor, it's chemistry of existence. You dissolve the solid, you melt the ego, you expose the decay, and the spirit separates from the residue. The old priests called it the work of Saturn. It's the art of using entropy as a creative tool. In astrology, Saturn rules boundaries, law, time, and discipline. But to the magician, those weren't limitations, they were instruments. Time measures the reaction. Law controls the vessel. Discipline ensures the work doesn't explode. In every serious magical order, you'll find Saturn's name carved into the foundation. Without his restraint, power becomes chaos. Without his gravity, light disperses. The very thing you curse in daily life, restriction, is the backbone of transformation. That's why Saturn isn't the villain of alchemy, he's the supervisor. The medieval Magi called him the black sun, not the bright star in the sky, but the invisible furnace inside matter. You can't see it, but it's burning everything from within. That's why his metal, lead, was used for sealing tombs and containing poisons. It absorbs corruption, just like Saturn absorbs karma. Lead isn't glamorous, but it's the only thing strong enough to hold the darkness without breaking. Every lead casket, every church bell, every organ pipe was a silent homage to that density, the weight that holds the world together. And here's the paradox: Saturn kills and refines at the same time. His destruction as purification. In Hermetic logic, every death is an equation, subtract illusion to reveal essence. That's why alchemists said, solvit coagula. Dissolve and bind. Destroy and rebuild. You can't skip the dissolution. The cube must melt before it can transmute. The lead must rot before it can shine. Saturn doesn't forgive shortcuts. He demands collapse before creation. Every esoteric doctrine understood this cycle, the descent into matter, the compression under time, the return through purification. The blackening, whitening, yellowing, and reddening, nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, rubedo, were not colors of chemistry, they were colors of consciousness. Nigredo is Saturn's reign, the night of the work. Albedo belongs to Luna, the purification of reflection. Citrinitas belongs to Sol, the dawn of awareness. Rubedo belongs to the philosopher's stone, the merging of opposites. And every phase begins and ends with Saturn's gate. In practical magic, invoking Saturn was not something done lightly. You didn't call him for wealth or luck. You called him for mastery. For patience, endurance, permanence. But the price was always pain. The rituals were austere. Black candles, iron symbols, lead talismans, silence. You didn't petition Saturn, you proved yourself to him. If you couldn't handle his silence, you weren't ready for power. That's how the old occultists filtered the weak. Because Saturn doesn't test your ambition, he tests your durability. The grimoires describe his influence as cold, slow, melancholy. But melancholy wasn't sadness, it was depth. The Saturnian temperament belonged to philosophers, mystics, and architects, people who could stare at time without blinking. Melancholy is the mind turning inward, dissecting itself. That's the Saturnian gift, the ability to endure isolation long enough to see the truth. Every genius carries a touch of it. Every creator has Saturn's fingerprint. Because every act of creation begins as destruction. Every masterpiece starts in silence, in pressure, in the black lab of Nigredo. In the secret societies, Saturn was always the hidden master, the one whose name wasn't spoken but whose seal appeared everywhere. The square, the cube, the lead disc, the color black. Even the phrase as above, so below hides his symmetry. Saturn is the mirror that reflects heaven into matter. He's the divider that makes manifestation possible. That's why every symbol of him is geometric, exact, mathematical. He's the god of proportion. Not chaos, not chance. Everything under his law must balance, or it breaks. When Heinrich Agrippa wrote 3 books of occult philosophy, he placed Saturn at the top of the planetary hierarchy, not because he loved darkness, but because he understood hierarchy itself begins with limitation. Saturn defines the structure of power. He draws the line that separates gods from men, teachers from fools, masters from pretenders. The uninitiated call him evil because they can't survive his pressure. The initiated call him sacred because they've been tempered by it. That's the entire logic of the mystery schools, no growth without gravity. Every real alchemist eventually becomes Saturnian, quiet, precise, patient, unmoved by emotion. They learn that time is the crucible and endurance is the fire. They stop rushing toward enlightenment and start surviving the work. Because in Saturn's world, nothing escapes untested. Every particle of ego must be measured, every desire calcined, every belief burned to ash. That's the path. It's not glamorous, it's not viral, it's not beautiful, but it's real. The old masters didn't chase light, they cultivated darkness until it turned into understanding. Saturn's symbol, the sickle, cuts illusions. His cube imprisons weakness. His metal poisons arrogance. His color absorbs light. His not destruction, his distillation. The reason he's feared is because he exposes what's fake by crushing it. There's no lying to time. There's no bargaining with gravity. That's why every occultist swore by his name before attempting any transmutation. You can fake charisma, you can fake faith, but you can't fake endurance. Saturn sorts the real from the imitation. That's why even in the final phase of alchemy, when the red stone is born, Saturn's presence remains. The gold that emerges still carries a memory of the lead that birthed it. The philosopher's stone isn't made in spite of Saturn, it's made through him. The alchemist who denies the black phase never finds the red one. Every miracle begins with a breakdown. Every revelation begins with ruin. Saturn doesn't bless you, he empties you. He makes room for the real work. Thank you for watching till the end. You've stayed through the dark fire, through the black gates of Saturn, and that means something. You're not afraid of the weight of truth.